RealAg Live. And welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. I'm your host today, Shaun Haney. Thanks so much for joining us here for this midweek edition of RealAg Live. Hope you're having yourself a great day and getting those tractor wheels turning, get some seed in the ground, no matter where you are across the country. Today we're going to have a great discussion about farm policy from a group that we don't necessarily hear from very much on Real Agriculture, and I'm looking forward to breaking down some of the issues and learning a little bit more today with our guest, Katie Ward. If you want to participate in today's discussion, all you have to do is enter your question or your comment in the box whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. So let's get to it here. And to bring in today's guest, it is Katie Ward. She is the president of the National Farmers Union. Katie, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you. Thank you so much for joining us here today. So, Katie, you're a farmer yourself. Tell us about your farm.
So my husband and I have 100 acres of pasture operation, primarily doing sheep and hogs, a little bit of forage and cereals for our animals, and we're direct marketers here in the Lower Ottawa Valley. So ninth generation in this area in my family.
Wow, ninth generation. That's
Yeah.
that puts you like mid 18. Like, where does that? Do you know when the farm was kind of started? Then what year?
Well, we're on a different farm than where my family started, but 1824, I want to say. Yeah,
It's going
early
back.
1800s.
Yeah,
Yep, it's been a while.
that is going back for sure. Okay, so
Mhm.
I guess you're with the National Farmers Union, the NFU. Can you tell us a little bit about the organization, where it stands today?
Sure. So we represent farmers from coast to coast, engaged in all different scales and types of farming, everything from urban and suburban market gardeners to broadacre export grain operations. Um, Everything from organic and biodynamic through to regenerative ranching and all sorts of different conventional production types. So we are the only national ag organization chartered by an act of parliament back in 1969. We're the only direct membership national farm organization, and we talk a lot about ag policy and how food sovereignty and ag policy mesh together and work for more sort of economic dignity for farmers in this country.
So one of the challenges I would see as I hear you describe kind of the membership and who you represent is that they are quite diverse in interest, in scale and size, and that has to be some sort of a challenge.
It's definitely a challenge. I mean, just like any aspect of political discussion in this country, there's regional differences. There's we have francophone and anglophone members, and all sorts of different challenges that can come along with different viewpoints, right? So we pride ourselves on having very robust debates in the organization. We're kind of famous for it, but really respectful discussions. It's a real challenge these days in any aspect of society to have civil discussions with people that you don't necessarily agree with and try to find common ground. And that's one thing we've always put an emphasis on. And I'm really proud to be a part of that.
Yeah. So board of directors from across the country then too?
Yep, representation, both elected to the executive at the national convention as well as elected to regional representation seats from all the different provinces. Yep.
Yeah. I don't know how many years it goes back, but I remember there was I don't know if it was, I don't know if I should use the word controversy or not, but there was some discussion around the NFU opening up some of its membership to more of those urban sort of, urban agriculturalists, let's say. Some people stamp them as like, we're letting, you're letting gardeners in, and it's calling
Mm.
them farmers. Has that created any changes in the organization, or what has been kind of the net of all that at the end of the day?
I think at the end of the day, I definitely consider it a net positive. You kind of have to look at it from the point of view of you can have some incredibly economically successful urban market gardeners. And when I say market garden, I mean it, food for folks' tables, right? I mean, you can have some incredible margins off of the right kind of product at the right time for the right market. And you just have to hit that niche. And there's some really successful people there, but it also helps to broaden the perspectives that we bring to agriculture, and broadens the conversations that we can be having. Our farmers are, for the direct marketers, talking to a really diverse range of customers. And that helps to inform our policy decisions and our discussions because, if you're thinking about what you're doing as a farmer, just like any business person, I mean, the customer isn't always right, but the customer isn't always wrong either. And you need to take that feedback. So it's helpful, right? We're always up to be challenged, and no matter what direction that's coming from.
Are there interests, I'm sort of labeling people here, so I understand that. I'm not trying to broad brush it, but are there interests different or essentially at the end of the day the same as, say, a commercial farmer in Saskatchewan?
See, and I would definitely say that those folks should be considered commercial farmers. Would be the first
Well,
sort of.
sorry, I use commercial from the standpoint of scale. Sorry, yeah,
Oh, fair.
yeah.
Okay. I had an interesting conversation actually with a broadacre, commercial farmer from Manitoba, when I was first running to be president of the NFU, and he asked me, you're a small farmer from Ontario. I mean, not overly small by Ontario standards, but small enough compared to him. He says, "What do I have in common with you?" And I said, "Well, you have more in common with me in terms of policy and economic interests than you would with, the a board member for an international grain conglomerate, for example. We have the economic dignity of farmers at heart, and making sure that regulation is appropriate to what we have to do for our operations to be able to maintain our farms. So, that's one perspective,
Yep.
anyways.
Okay, that's totally fair. Now let's get on to some issues here. And when I think of some of the work based on the releases I get from the NFU, one of the topics I think that likely is really resonating that you've been passionate about for quite some time, and it falls very nice in parallel with the current federal government. That is climate issues. Do you
Mhm.
feel like finally maybe the from your perspective the federal government's come in line with what you've been talking about for a while?
I was looking up some information on the NFU history of work on the climate file, and the first policy resolution I could find that was passed at one of our national conventions was back in 1997. And as early as 2003, it was the theme of a national convention of ours. So we've definitely been delving into the topic for almost a quarter of a century at this point. Um, it's been really gratifying to see the attention paid. We really do follow the science and what the experts are telling us that we should be expecting on our farms. And we're already especially hearing from our younger farmers who are facing, a full career of climate upheaval in what they're facing in their farming careers. And we need to really push government to support farmers in making a transition to lower emissions agriculture. We do see the writing on the wall that every industry is going to have to make adjustments, and our margins are so low traditionally in farming that we can't take this financial hit on the chin to make this transition. And we've been pushing government to support farmers to do this. And so we're glad to see them listening.
So, what are some of those things that you think need to change to create that future from your perspective?
Well, the science tells us that low emissions agriculture is going to mean lower input agriculture. Carbon sequestration is always an absolute good, but we do need to lower our emissions because there's only so much that carbon sequestration can do to counter the emissions that are coming out. And we're only sort of 8 to 12% of Canada's emissions in agriculture, depending on how you do the math and what you count in. But we're still going to have to make a dent in that. And the quickest way to do that is to reduce the emissions that come from the inputs we use on our farms. There's lots of things that we can do on the livestock front as well, whether it be different management techniques that are going to reduce your methane. If we can, the more work we can do on raising livestock to slaughter weight earlier, the lower their lifetime methane emissions are going to be. But we really do need to find techniques that are going to lower inputs.
Where does the NFU sit on the price on pollution, the carbon tax?
So this is it's definitely a controversial position in agriculture, but we did intervene in the Supreme Court case on behalf of the federal government, not because we support a carbon levy in and of itself, but because we support strong federal action to implement a plan that's going to reduce our emissions. There's various ways to do that, and we have advocated for rebates for farmers for much of the pollution pricing that we're paying. But we definitely see a need for incentivizing emissions reduction, being the carrot as opposed to the stick.
Do you feel that the current federal government, because other farm groups have talked about how we're seeing a lot of stick and not a lot of carrot. Do you agree with that?
I think we're really hopeful that we're going to see more of the carrot coming out of the programs announced in the budget. Direct payments to farmers to adopt practices that are going to reduce their emissions, to implement cover cropping, and the more of the incentive that we can see, the better. And we're starting to see, it takes a while to change direction on a ship as big as the federal government sometimes, but we're really starting to see that shift. and we're pleased to see that for sure.
That's an understatement, Katie. It takes a long time to turn the ship of government. That's
I did not want to make a Titanic reference, but
yeah, let's hope it doesn't sink. Okay. So in that, do you know why the government's gone the way of this idea of rebates versus an exemption? This is something that comes up with a lot of people in the policy. Why go through the administrative costs if you're going to give money back or trying to reduce the expense of the price on pollution for something like grain drying? Let's use that that's always the example that comes up. Why not just make it exempt instead of going through this whole rebate process? Or it's sort of like they've kind of turned it into like if you're buying a TV, you get money back if you mail in a letter. Do you know why? Do you have an answer to this?
Well, the best answer, I think, would be that if you just have an exemption, where is the incentive to lower those emissions, to explore finding out what other options are on the market other than propane or natural gas? There's different techniques around, biomass or, crop residue. I think that there could be more science come out about what the emissions are going to be around those, but I really was pleased to see some funding in the budget to get grain drying opportunities that are cleaner burning, because the issue with grain drying is, a lot of this exemption talk came out of the horrible harvest that was 2019. Well, that's just one aspect of the climate upheaval and the extreme weather that we're starting to see that's affecting our harvests, right? A lot of folks seem to think that climate change is just going to mean a longer growing season and warmer weather, and they're going to be able to grow more crops in a season, maybe get a second crop in where they wouldn't have before. But that's not the case, right? The science tells us that we're just going to have weirder, freak frosts at times we're not expecting, or extremely wet patches at the worst possible time, that kind of thing. And so the more we allow those emissions to continue, like we're still growing our emissions right now, not shrinking them. And the more we allow that to happen, we're just going to it's creating a vicious circle, right? We're going to run into weirder weather that's going to require more fossil fuel type things, unless we really incentivize the research and development and commercialization of some of these products that are going to help us get off that train.
Yeah. Okay, we can maybe come back to climate later. I want to make sure we cover some of these other topics. I know one that you've been getting a lot of time with the minister on is in regards to childcare. It was a huge part
Mm-hmm.
of last week's budget. It's a mainstream topic. It's one in rural communities too. Trying to
Mm-hmm.
find a way to get childcare costs down to $10 for basically every Canadian that's looking for it. In rural communities, though, I still think it's not the cost that's the biggest problem. It's access.
Mm-hmm.
It's having availability. If you actually want it, I would pay $50 if I actually had somebody in the community that was providing that kind of service. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, flexibility and figuring out access issues, not just for farm families, for all rural families, right? Because, those folks are in our communities as well, but also things like shift workers or, first responders, those kinds of folks that have other than 9 to 5 schedules. But for us, remote location is really an issue. So we sat down with Minister Bibeau last week and talked about a number of different options that just from talking to some of our parents who are leaders in the NFU, there's programs that fall under the sort of temporary foreign worker style of program, which would clearly need some attention to protection if you're bringing folks into your home. If we're talking about weatherizing residential accommodations, because right now most temporary foreign workers in this country are sort of summer bunk houses. That's not really an option if you're talking about childcare year round. But a lot of times you might need an au pair style access, have someone nearby, or look at options for rural childcare. But it's going to have to accommodate things like 24 hours a day if you're in harvest or planting season. Livestock farms, sometimes you have 24 hours a day, busy season during calving. But if you're talking about bringing folks onto your farm to do childcare as well, there's a number of other considerations that go along with that. Folks that might not traditionally be farm workers, you have to have safety training for those people. They wouldn't understand a lot of what we face on our farms. It's challenging enough having kids on a farm as well. Adding new folks on top of that. So there's a number of programs around the world actually that we've referred the government to. There's a temporary foreign workers program in Costa Rica that actually has childcare and domestic workers come, but they can bring their families, so that these mothers who are doing this work, this labor that's so necessary, don't have to then get separated from their own children. There's Yeah, it's really interesting, the options that are on the table, and I'm curious to see how things go.
So in the list of priorities for the industry, do you like where does the childcare one kind of shake out? There's a lot of different needs, and even inside the agricultural industry, just trying to find people to work in the industry. Period. Never mind trying to find childcare in
Hmm.
around the industry. Where does this one stack up from the NFU's perspective in terms of being a priority when you're sitting down with the minister?
Hmm.
Where is this in the relative question? Where is it in the relative list?
Oh, I mean, I think it falls about the same priority as the entire question of generational succession on
Mm.
farms, right? Because we're facing an aging population as farmers, as our demographic, and how do we make farming an attractive career prospect for a younger generation? I mean, I grew up on a farm and I know how fantastic it can be to grow up on a farm and the opportunities that you can have, but there are fewer and fewer farm families now. So, I had a whole passel of cousins around me to grow up with, kind of thing. But there's fewer farm families, and you need that socialization for kids. You need to make farming attractive to a young person to get into, and but as a business, but also to raise their family, because it's not just a business; it's a lifestyle, and that has to be a part of it.
This Friday is the deadline for submissions from individuals, farm
Mhm.
groups on the review of the Canada Grain Act.
Mhm.
I have the press release from your organization. Were there anything in particular you wanted to make sure you establish your position on for the audience?
I think there's a lot of commonality across the farm groups in terms of wanting to maintain the farmer mandate for the CGC. I think it's such a foundation of our um, grain-based agriculture. I think we should, be looking at increasing licensing and bonding issues for a lot of the points of sale that have sprung up in the time since the last review and the last time that the act was reviewed, that are not currently subject to those. And I think one thing as well that would be very beneficial is if we could facilitate ease of the mechanism by which farmers can access dispute resolution services that the CGC provides right now. Farmers need to, if they're having any concerns, they have to engage in that dispute mechanism at the time that they drop off their grain, which kind of doesn't always work out if you don't discover a problem right away, right? So poses a problem. We have some improved technology, I think, that would facilitate fixing that. But really, the maintaining the mandate, I think, is key. There's a number of other things. I would definitely refer folks to nfu.ca, check out our suggestions, and I'd really encourage people to educate themselves on what's under discussion and submit a comment. Don't hesitate to speak up in favor of farmer interests.
Now, there are some similarities. Like when I read through some of the lists, because I have said there's a handful of main popular topics on the Grain Act review. The two that stick out to me that are kind of the most, I don't know, you get the strongest opinions on both sides maybe. One is reporting from grain companies and what should be mandatory in terms of do we need to increase the volume and the transparency of things like sales in the countryside. Two would be can we have private outward bound inspections? So could a company like SGS do that inspection instead of the CGC? In both cases, NFU, from what I can tell, fit very in line with like an organization like Sask Wheat, but on the opposite side of the spectrum as a group like say the Western Wheat Growers, for example. So in terms of that transparency, why do you believe the transparency of the data is so important?
Well, I mean, the more data points you have, the better decisions you can make. I mean, if you have that available and choose not to make use of it, that is fine. But it really does give you a wider, knowledge base upon which to make future decisions. I would be hard pressed to find any business person who wouldn't want more information to help make their business decisions. And I think it's, that one's a pretty easy call. In terms of outward inspection, I mean, this is something that has been really key for farmers as part of the quality branding of Canadian grain. And I mean, if the buyers want to add on their own inspection voluntarily, that's up to them. But I think we have this core service. It maintains our brand internationally. If we lose that, you can't get it back very easily. This is something that, was set up in the best interest of farmers, and I think it's in the best interest of farmers that it continue.
There are countries that do third-party outward inspections. Earlier, you said, making farms financially viable. We've heard the grain companies say that, and groups like Alberta Wheat is another example where they're in favor of third-party, along with Western Wheat Growers. And one of the things that's talked about is not, some of the SGS people, as in this example, are former CGC employees. It would save the whole pipeline, the value chain money, essentially saving farmers money at the end of the trail. Does that not shake out with you? Do you disagree that we would see that?
I disagree that we would see that, and I think um, you know the CGC inspection is part of the cost of doing business. The private, that's a voluntary add-on. They could choose not to do that. They could choose to use the CGC inspection, and it wouldn't cost them any more.
From a collaboration standpoint, does the NFU work or collaborate with other farm groups in the country? And if so, can you give us some examples?
Well, our biggest active collaboration right now is with Farmers for Climate Solutions. We're a founding member of the group, and there's a number of different farm groups, forage groups, as well as farmer-directed um, sort of advocacy groups that are all across the country and represent tens of thousands of farmers that are all focused on the contributions that agriculture can make to our climate problem.
Where does NFU sit on trade? It's one of the topics where maybe my fault. I sometimes think when we have free trade agreement talk come up, I tend to have the perception that the NFU is very cautious on expanding trade deals or having trade deals. Am I correct me? I guess set me straight.
Well, I don't think cautious is necessarily a bad word, so I don't know that that would need correction. I think we are in favor of trade that is smart and good for Canadians and for Canadian farmers. I think we have discovered in a fair number of trade agreements over decades that things don't always shake out to the benefit um, of farmers the way that they're promised to be during what might end up being a pretty rushed deal happening behind closed doors. And so I think caution's not necessarily a bad thing. Like I was saying earlier about data points and having the information before you make the decision or before you agree to support something is usually where we would end up coming down on stuff.
So do you have a current, the three that get thrown, we talk about a lot right now are the obviously the new USMCA or the Kuzma agreement, the
Mhm.
CPTPP agreement, or CETA.
Mhm.
Do any of those three qualify as smart trade from your perspective?
I think they all have their ups and downs, right? Nothing. It's too easy to sort of paint with a broad brush, and nothing's that black and white. I think one of the biggest problems with CETA that sort of comes to mind about it would have been good to have more information right off the hop was around the beef allowances of increased Canadian beef into the EU, but the amount of slaughter capacity that we have, or um, the capacity that we have to export beef that meets their standards, just isn't there and didn't materialize because those regulations to meet those standards weren't included in the trade agreement. And that was one of the things that we had warned about. This is getting promised. We'll get all this beef access as a sort of a compensation for giving up dairy, and it just didn't materialize. And we had told folks that the devil's in the details, and that is how it shook out in the end, right? I mean, beef farmers are just not getting the access that they thought that they were promised, but wasn't really in written in stone.
Yeah. The other question I was going to ask you about was in terms of, if you don't have a comment, don't like just do a pass on it. I'm not sure what you personally are totally focused on in all these files, so I'm throwing stuff at you. But in the regards to what we've seen there was a public comment period about gene editing.
Mm.
That's going on. And interesting what your position is on that. And also, there's been a whole bunch of stuff happening in the seed industry as it pertains to value creation. We've got seed companies trying to test some new ways of increasing the amount of revenue from seed varieties, proprietary varieties, and trying to create more investment in this. And this is an issue around wheat specifically. It affects other
Mhm.
crops, but wheat would be the most passionate of all the different crop types. Start with gene editing. How do you feel about some of those things?
The NFU has long been a believer in the precautionary principle. and there's we're reluctant to agree to give a free pass to something when the science is so new and there's the possibility of it being a backdoor to patenting traditional seed breeding and not knowing what the consequences are going to be there. If you're There's instances in different places in the world of traditional sort of indigenous seed breeding that's been going on, and all of a sudden there's patents imposed on traditional varieties that haven't had any real input from the new patent holders, and so we're cautious about that, sort of just moving that a little bit further down the road. So we're I guess that's about as far as I would want to go on that. I'm not necessarily the subject matter expert.
Right.
Um, but then to follow up in terms of the value creation, um, this is something that the NFU has a lot of very passionate, engaged members on around farmers' right to save seed and um, the real need to support public plant breeding in this country, that supports variety creation that's going to thrive in the climate that we grow in, that's going to serve our members and our farmers that are doing the work on the ground, and not going to result in deregistration of varieties that all of a sudden would be entering into sort of common domain. We have real concerns about how this value creation model is going to impinge on farmers' right to save seeds, and just end up being a way to, take value out of farmers' pockets for the work that we're doing in stewarding these seed varieties over the years.
Now, Katie, repeatedly though, the Seeds, well, now it's called Seeds Canada, but formerly the CSTA has repeatedly said that there's no challenge here. There's no intention for farmers not to be able to save seed. Is this a scuttle about nothing in terms of this is a wedge point to get farmers riled up about the issue, or do you think that the seed companies are being insincere in what they're saying?
Well, I would, I guess, challenge that sort of assertion, because that's not something that they're going to put in writing, right? They're talking about, well, not talking about. There's already contracts in place that are sort of running around the process that has gotten held up by farmers standing up and saying this is not the way we want to see things rushed through. And you know regulation in this country is supposed to serve the citizens and the taxpayers and us farmers, and our voice needs to be heard in that. And I think that there shouldn't be an end run around that process. That's part of the government. It's part of our society that we live in.
Okay. Well, you know what, Katie, this has been a lot, very, very interesting. It has been fun. It's been great. You and I have never chatted before. And you've actually, you farm right beside Lindsay. Your Lindsay's
Yep.
kind of next door neighbor, we'll call it. So I'm glad she made the introduction. And I think, this is really, really important to hear from all sides of the spectrum when it comes to agricultural issues. And quite frankly, right now, as you said, the NFU is getting some ear time with the Federal Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food, Marie-Claude Bebeau. What we'll wrap up with this. Why do you think that you've been able to gain a little bit more time with the minister on some of these issues?
Well, I think it's helpful to be coming to the table with some proposals for solutions. It never hurts in trying to get a conversation going. I think, and this is just a personal observation, but I mean, the NFU has been pushing for childcare and rural access for decades. Women in our leadership now were farm kids when their moms were making proposals around rural childcare. But this year we've had a pandemic with women federal cabinet ministers who are doing childcare from home. And I think that, sort of just freak timing, but, it helped to spark the conversation. And of course, we're, pushing climate change issues that will help agriculture and help agriculture play a role in positive action forward. And that's, a major topic for the government. So they seem to have become a little bit more aligned with us, which is a happy coincidence.
Interesting stuff. Katie, thank you so much. We've been talking to Katie Ward. She is president of the National Farmers Union, NFU, based out of Ontario, where she farms with her family. So, Katie, thank you so much for joining us here today on RealAg Live.
Thanks for the time.
Okay, everybody. Great stuff. Interesting. We'd like to hear your perspective. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. And don't forget to tune in to RealAg Radio today on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM, 4:30 Eastern, 2:30 Mountain. We got a great show for you here today. Lots of great discussions. We're going to have a little bit of discussion about teamwork on the show today. We're also going to hear from Brendan Burney, chair of the Grain Farmers of Ontario. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live. Chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.